Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, a deadly plane crash in Brazil. The airline confirms that all 61 people on board, including 57 passengers and 4 crew members, are dead. Videos on social media capture the aircraft spiraling in the sky before crashing in a fiery wreck. What we know so far. More military aid is on its way to Kyiv as Russia battles a historic round of incursion by the Ukrainian forces. Sam Wong tracks the battle. Vice President Kamala Harris makes her first comments about her upcoming debate with former President Trump. She also picks up a surprise endorsement as she courts Hispanic voters. Jason Blair has the campaign updates. Former President Trump's January 6th case is delayed. The prosecutors asked for more time to figure out how the presidential immunity ruling changes the case. And a January 6th defendant sentenced to 20 years in prison. It's one of the longest sentences among hundreds of prosecutions related to the 2021 Capitol breach. California's governor is calling on agencies to remove homeless encampments. He says he will redirect money if local agencies can't reduce homelessness.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Tragic news coming out of Brazil. A passenger plane carrying 61 people crashed today in a fiery wreck on the outskirts of Sao Paulo. In a statement shared on X, the president of Brazil said there appear to be no survivors.
I have to be the bearer of very bad news, and I would like everyone to stand up so that we can observe a minute of silence because a plane has just crashed in the city of Vinhedo in São Paulo with 58 passengers and 4 crew members, and it appears they all died. I want to ask for a minute of silence for the victims.
The airline later confirmed the tragic news and updated the death toll to 61. Dramatic footage from the scene shows the plane's destroyed fuselage in flames on the ground. It's still not clear what caused the plane to crash. Social media videos of the crash show the plane spiraling out of the sky before hitting the ground as people in the neighborhood shouted in fear. Emergency responders dispatched teams to the crash site, and authorities sealed off the entrance to the residential area where the plane went down. Flight 2283 left Cascavel in the Brazilian state of Paraná and was en route to Sao Paulo. It lost signal shortly before 1:30 p.m. local time. That's according to data on Flight Radar 24. This is a developing story. We'll keep you updated as newer information comes out. Turning now to the Russia-Ukraine war, the White House today announcing another round of military aid to Ukraine. This as the Kremlin battles an unprecedented cross-border incursion by Ukrainian forces. NTD's Sam Wong has the latest.
On Friday, the U.S. announced another round of military aid for Ukraine. The $125 million package will include Stinger missiles, artillery ammunition, and anti-armor systems. The White House said it would be Washington's 10th batch of equipment to Kyiv since President Biden signed a national security package in April. Meanwhile, fighting continues in Russia's border region of Kursk. The Kremlin declared a state of emergency after Ukrainian troops launched a surprise cross-border incursion this week. Footage shows a string of burnt-out Russian military trucks lined up along a highway in Kursk. Some of them appear to be carrying dead bodies. The Pentagon on Thursday said Ukraine's counterattack was consistent with U.S. policy.
They are taking actions to protect themselves from attacks that are coming from a region that are within the U.S. policy of where they can operate.
Ukrainian authorities have ordered an evacuation after Russia doubled down its airstrikes in the border zone. Officials said roughly 20,000 people need to leave the area. Though limited in scope, Ukraine's operation, now on its 4th day, has pushed the war to a number of Russian towns and cities, including Sudzha, where a major gas pipeline is located. Some European countries, namely Austria, Hungary, and Slovakia, still rely heavily on Russian gas. Russian President Vladimir Putin called the attack a serious escalation. That says the incursion has forced the world's largest nuclear power to call in reserves. The cross-border attack came after months of Russian onslaught in eastern Ukraine. On Friday, Ukrainian officials said a Russian missile hit a supermarket in the Donetsk region, killing at least 14 people. So far, Kyiv has yet to comment directly on the Kursk offensive, but President Volodymyr Zelensky said, quote, "Russia brought the war to our land and should feel what it has done." Sam Wang, NTD News.
An Israeli airstrike took out another senior Hamas security leader in Lebanon today. The attack happened in the Lebanese port city of Sidon. According to Hamas sources, Samir al-Hajj was killed and his bodyguard was injured in the strike. Al-Hajj had worked in a nearby Palestinian refugee camp. Israel has been going after Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorists inside of Lebanon alongside the war in Gaza. Last week, Hezbollah's top military leader was killed in an Israeli attack outside of Beirut. A short time later, another Hamas chief was killed in Tehran. Iran's proxy terrorist groups like Hezbollah blame Israel for the attacks, vowing to seek revenge. Vice President Kamala Harris briefly while on the tarmac in Michigan. She made her first comments about the recently confirmed debate between her and former President Trump. NTD's Jason Blair has more.
On Thursday, before boarding a plane in Michigan, Vice President Kamala Harris stopped to take a few questions from reporters. She was asked about her scheduled September 10th debate with former President Trump.
I'm looking forward to it and hope he shows up.
And when asked about being open to additional debates,
I am happy to have that conversation about an additional debate for after September 10th.
Harris has yet to do any formal interviews or press conferences since President Biden dropped out of the race.
Why does she refuse to answer questions from the media?
However, Harris also said on Thursday she plans to schedule a formal interview by the end of the month. Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz also launched an ad campaign in English and Spanish targeting Latino voters on Wednesday. And on Friday, the political arm of the League of United Latin American Citizens, which is the USA's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organization, announced their endorsement of Harris. They said that this is their first ever presidential endorsement. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
A pivotal moment for independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. A judge is set to decide whether Kennedy will appear on the New York ballot. New York State Supreme Court Justice Christina Raiba will soon rule on whether RFK Jr. falsely claimed he has a New York residence. Lawyers representing several New Yorkers say Kennedy has resided in L.A. since 2014, but he stated on his nomination petitions that he lives in New York. A Board of Elections spokesperson said if the judge rules against Kennedy, he will not appear on the ballot in New York. After leaving the courthouse yesterday, Kennedy said he has lived in the state since 1964. Though his home address is in California, Kennedy said he always planned to return to New York. He also said he rents a room at a friend's house in Katona, New York. Trump's January 6th case is delayed at the request of special counsel Jack Smith. Prosecutors with Smith's office want more time to decide how to proceed after the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity. The judge has now pushed the next hearing back to September 5th. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has the update on Trump's federal election case.
Special counsel Jack Smith's office, in a new filing Thursday, asked the court to extend the deadline for the next status report to the end of August. Prosecutors wrote the government is assessing the new precedent set in the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity. The prosecution in its filing stated the defense didn't object to the request for a delay. This after the Supreme Court ruled in June 6-3 that presidents have immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts. D.C. District Judge Tanya Chutkan had earlier disagreed that presidents are immune from criminal prosecution. The case was on hold for roughly 7 months during appeal. Chutkan told government and defense attorneys to collaborate on a proposal for next steps in the case after the Supreme Court sent the case back to her last month. Chutkan said Trump is not required to attend the hearing that she scheduled next Friday. It would be the first time the case is back in court since the presidential immunity ruling. A delay would push any activity in the case into September at the earliest, just months before the presidential election. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
A California man was sentenced today to 20 years in prison for his role in the January 6th Capitol breach. This is one of the longest sentences so far among hundreds of January 6th defendants. Prosecutors say David Nicholas Dempsey repeatedly attacked police with flagpoles and other makeshift weapons during the 2021 breach of the Capitol. He allegedly stomped on police officers' heads, swung poles at officers defending a tunnel, struck an officer in the head with a metal crutch, and attacked police with pepper spray and broken pieces of furniture. Prosecutors described him as one of the most violent members of the January 6th crowd. He allegedly injured at least 2 police officers. Dempsey pleaded guilty in January to 2 counts of assaulting police officers with a dangerous weapon. He's been jailed since his arrest in August 2021. So far, only former Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio has received a longer sentence for January 6th. The remnants of Debby are expected to bring heavy rain and severe weather to the mid-Atlantic and northeastern states through the weekend, increasing the risk of dangerous flash flooding and tornadoes. NTD's Christina Corona gives us the update on Debby's path.
The National Weather Service announced flood warnings and watches have been issued from the Carolinas to New England Friday. Rainfall amounts are expected to reach 15 to 25 inches in some areas, which could lead to catastrophic flooding impacts through Saturday morning. New York Governor Kathy Hochul declared a state of emergency on Friday.
This is the peak of hurricane season. It is getting longer, more sustained than we've ever had.
She said in a Facebook post, "We are prepared to deploy resources to areas affected by the severe weather caused by the remnants of Debby. Please stay safe, monitor your local forecasts, and keep off the roads." In the aftermath of Debby, many residents are left dealing with severe flooding, now facing the task of cleaning up and repairing the damage.
We are waiting for the water to go down so we can help everybody get their stuff cleaned up and get back in their buildings and see what damage is done. The drains are working pretty good right now. The water's going down really fast. We're just praying that we don't get any more rain.
The remnants of Debby brought heavy rain and flooded roads to Washington, D.C., where a tornado warning was briefly issued on Friday. But Debby has weakened since its first arrival in the U.S. It downgraded to a tropical depression on Thursday after making a second landfall in South Carolina. Debby has further downgraded to a post-tropical storm on Friday, with winds of 30 miles per hour. In Vermont, Governor Phil Scott cautioned about significant damage across the state, highlighting areas that were already saturated and experienced flash flooding twice last month.
Our emergency management team, along with many others across the state, continue to watch Tropical Depression Debby, while also responding to ongoing rain and previous flooding throughout the state.
He says Debby will impact the western side of the state Friday and the vast majority of Vermont.
We want to remind folks to be smart and safe. Please don't drive through flooded waters. Sometimes there is no road under what appears to be a small amount of water over the pavement.
At least 8 fatalities have been confirmed due to Debby so far. The most recent fatality happened Thursday night. A 78-year-old woman was killed by a falling tree that struck her home in Brown Summit, North Carolina. The highest risk of heavy rainfall and flooding extends from central Pennsylvania through northern New York State into Friday night. A tornado watch remains in effect until the afternoon for areas from northeastern Maryland to southern New York State. Christina Corona, NTD News.
California Governor Gavin Newsom says he will start redirecting money from local agencies that don't show results in reducing homelessness. NTD's David Lamb reports.
California's Governor Gavin Newsom with the state's transportation department were trying to clear homeless encampments Thursday.
I'm here on behalf of 40 million Californians that are fed up. I'm here because I'm one of them. I want to see results. I don't want to read about them. I don't want to see the data. I want to see it by believing it, by seeing people that are back up on their feet, and to get those streets clean, get those tents off the streets, the encampments off the streets, and to begin once again to feel pride about our state.
Standing in front of a cleared homeless encampment in Los Angeles, Newsom said he would start taking state funding away from cities that are not doing enough to move people out of encampments and into a shelter.
This is not about criminalization. What's criminal is neglecting people that are struggling and suffering and dying on our watch. That's criminal.
Newsom issued an executive order in July calling on state agencies to take down encampments and urging local governments to address them. He said some local jurisdictions are not doing enough despite the resources provided by the state. He added money could start being redirected next year when the state starts forming its budget proposals. California is home to roughly 1/3 of the nation's population of homeless people. The Public Policy Institute of California says there are an estimated 180,000 people experiencing homelessness in the state. David Lamb, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese regime's systematic forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience is in the spotlight. A survivor of this atrocity is speaking out and getting attention in multiple media outlets, bringing more pressure on the CCP. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Perhaps the first known survivor of the Chinese Communist Party's forced live organ harvesting campaign, a Falun Dafa practitioner in Washington, D.C., speaking out about how he had parts of his liver and lung forcibly removed while in China.
The reason I'm taking a stand today is because my friends who suffer persecution in prison in China can no longer make their voices heard. They've already passed away. We once promised each other whoever made it out alive would tell the truth to the public. My family members have been threatened. The CCP has employed a variety of tactics.
Pei Ming-chung said Chinese authorities forcibly removed his organs once in 2004 and again in 2006. Parts of his lung and liver are missing, which can be used for transplants in pediatric patients. Chung is targeted for forced organ harvesting by the Chinese regime because he practices Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa, a spiritual practice with meditative exercises and moral teachings. The practice has been heavily persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party since 1999 because of its popularity. Chung is the first to share his story of surviving this method of persecution, forced live organ harvesting. He's been arrested 5 times and sentenced to over 8 years for his belief. He escaped when a prison guard fell asleep with the window open.
The government of China on the whole has said very little about forced organ harvesting. There's a tendency just to ignore it. The numbers of transplantation shot up way dramatically after the persecution of Falun Gong began.
It's a major problem, and it's one of those things like the story in Sherlock Holmes. It's the dog that didn't bark. You're not hearing about it. It's big.
Worldwide, officials have for years been condemning the persecution of Falun Gong in China. And most recently, in the Senate, was introduced the Falun Gong Protection Act, which would sanction any individual involved in the Chinese regime's state-sanctioned forced live organ harvesting. A similar version of the bill passed the House back in June. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The State Department today urged the Chinese regime to stop persecuting practitioners of Falun Gong. This came in light of a recent report showing that the Chinese regime is stepping up its campaign. Newly leaked documents revealed that the regime is providing resources to social media influencers and Western media to attack Xinyi performing arts and Falun Gong. Earlier, we spoke with Nick Haley, researcher at the Falun Dafa Information Center, who worked on this report. Nick Haley, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And to begin, you actually helped on this report. What is new about this campaign?
Right. So, as you know, the Chinese regime has been targeting Falun Gong in China for decades, and they've also been targeting Falun Gong around the world. But what's really new here is the emphasis that they're placing on the international community of Falun Gong practitioners, particularly when it comes to the narrative about what Falun Gong is. And so what we're really seeing here is a level of sophistication that we just really haven't seen on this front in the past. They're talking about, in these leaked meeting notes from the Ministry of Public Security, as well as some other sources, they're talking about using social media influencers to spread disinformation about Falun Gong. They're talking about amplifying the content through fake accounts across different social media platforms. And then they're also talking about manipulating search engine results, as well as activating quote embedded agents within the Falun Gong community. So they're really trying to push this on multiple fronts. And it's a level of sophistication that we just haven't seen in the past.
Now, when it comes to what this report calls the CCP weaponization of social media, can you give us some examples of this campaign in motion?
Sure. So really at the heart and center of this campaign, based on these meeting notes, they're really trying to support at least 2 YouTubers who, for the past year, but really ramping up in the past few months, have been aggressively pushing disinformation about Falun Gong, as well as Shenyun Performing Arts, which is a classical Chinese dance company started by Falun Gong practitioners who fled religious persecution in China. And they really see this as a threat to their narrative, particularly about their repression of this group of people inside China. So they're trying to essentially diminish the Falun Gong community's reputation when it comes to speaking out against these rights abuses.
Why would the Chinese regime target a dance group that was started in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think this is particularly interesting because what Shenyun is really trying to do is revive traditional Chinese culture, which you would think a Chinese government would be all about. But for the past 75 years, the Chinese regime has sought to eradicate, essentially, traditional Chinese culture and replace that with this rendition that is filled with communism and atheistic ideology that the Chinese regime has been trying to implement. In addition, as part of some of their performances, in addition to, demonstrating what real traditional Chinese culture is and its beauty, they're portraying modern issues such as the persecution of Falun Gong, and the regime views that as threatening.
And why is the regime going after this faith group? What is it threatened by it? Why is that?
Well, that's a good question. To me, even though I've been researching this persecution for quite some time now, it's really quite unfathomable. This is a group of peaceful meditators who are trying to be better people, and arguably largely because of the number of people. There were 70 to 100 million people practicing this in the late 90s. The Chinese regimes saw that as a threat. There were more people practicing this than there were members of the Communist Party. They had an insecure leader who was really trying to secure his hold on power, and he really took an opportunity to initiate this campaign against Falun Gong and rally support and see who would go along with him in this persecution, kind of as a litmus test to see who was loyal to him.
And if the Chinese Communist Party succeeds in its campaign here to eradicate Falun Gong, what would be the impact?
Well, I think on the international front, I don't think there's really any chance that they could really get rid of Falun Gong, but I think what they really see as their goal is trying to eliminate the support that U.S. government officials around the world have shown to the Falun Gong community, condemning the persecution. I think the Chinese regime would really like to see that stop. And so were the regime to succeed in this campaign, essentially having the international community buy into this disinformation, I think you'd see less support from those officials, less support from the international community more broadly. And that has broad implications. And if they can do this against a group of peaceful meditators, imagine what they can do to U.S. companies who the Chinese regime views as competitors to its state-owned enterprises.
And given all of that, what should Americans and the U.S. government do about this to combat the Chinese Communist regime's influence in America?
Well, for one thing, given that they're pushing this disinformation on so many different levels, from YouTubers to these fake accounts across all the social media platforms, I think they're really hoping that these narratives get picked up by major Western media outlets. And unfortunately, in the past, especially in the early days of the persecution, you saw some of that happening. Some verbatim Chinese Communist Party propaganda about Falun Gong was repeated in major Western media outlets. And I think with the level of effort that they're giving this new campaign, it's possible that we could see that here. So I think it's important for Americans to be skeptical about emerging news stories about Falun Gong and Shenyun. As for the U.S. government, I think there's a number of things they could do. Perhaps one of the most important ones, some of the agents that some of the people that they're naming in these meeting notes are ostensibly acting as agents for China's Ministry of Public Security right here in the United States. If that's the case, they could potentially be in violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So these individuals need to be investigated.
That sounds like it could be raising all sorts of national security concerns here in the U.S., but expanding on that, why should Americans care about what is happening to, say, Shen Yun and the Falun Gong group more broadly?
Well, as I mentioned, if they're able to do this against this peaceful group of people, they could do it against any company or group of people that the regime views as threatening. And mind you, Shen Yun Performing Arts is a U.S.-based nonprofit. This is an American company. A lot of the Falun Gong practitioners are American citizens. These aren't just some other. This is Americans.
Nick Haley, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Former President Trump says that as president, he should have a say in the Federal Reserve's interest rate decisions, which impact the world economy. But Fed Chair Jerome Powell disagrees. NTD speaks to an economist about both sides of the argument.
The president should have at least say in there.
Former President Trump said at a press conference Thursday that he wants to be able to influence Federal Reserve interest rate decisions as president.
I made a lot of money. I was very successful, and I think I have a better instinct than, in many cases, people that would be on the Federal Reserve or the chairman.
The Federal Reserve controls America's money supply. Its policies impact the entire world. Bad decisions can lead to large-scale economic downturns. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says the Fed should be free of political influence.
The absence of direct political control over our decisions allows us to take these necessary measures without considering short-term political factors.
Powell says he aims to make the best long-term decisions, which may not be popular in the short term.
We want the Federal Reserve to be focused on true underlying economic principles and factors, and not focused on what a given political party might want.
Economist Sean Dubervac agrees. The Federal Reserve can temporarily juice up the economy by lowering rates. This makes the president look good, but it could also lead to inflation in the long term. Back in 2018, Trump criticized the Fed for raising interest rates. His comments Thursday continued that criticism.
He's right to question them. He's right to sort of ask, maybe we should be thinking about putting more guardrails, more accountability on the Fed because its decisions have such a big impact.
Economist Paul Mueller agrees the Fed should be independent, but he also says the Fed may have too little accountability.
Right now, there's a whole game that lots of economists and people on Wall Street are always watching. What's the Fed going to do? Are they going to cut rates in September? Are they going to cut rates in November?
Mueller says while this may seem fun, it's not great and creates volatility. He suggests that Congress create clear rules for the Fed's operation.
People don't necessarily agree on exactly what those rules would be, but having some kind of rule, some kind of clear guidance that everybody knows about, that is very predictable, stable.
The Fed's next interest rate decision will be announced between September 17th and 18th at the next meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee.
Venezuelans held a candlelight vigil last night to demand the release of political prisoners. Opposition groups and human rights activists organized the event during a ban on X. Attendees formed the words peace and freedom with their candles. Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro said roughly 2,000 people were arrested during the protests. U.S.-based Human Rights Watch reported at least 20 people were killed. Maduro said yesterday he signed a decree to block social media platform X from the country for 10 days. The president's announcement comes after Maduro and X owner Elon Musk exchanged accusations over Venezuela's disputed presidential election. Maduro and Venezuela's electoral authorities say he won a third term in the election. The opposition says it has proof that it won with more than double the votes than Maduro. Neither Maduro nor the electoral body have released detailed vote tallies. The United Kingdom is looking to toughen social media laws to tackle misinformation and other problematic content. It comes in the wake of nearly 2 weeks of protests and riots.
Britain's government is looking to review social media laws following the recent riots that spread across the country. There have been calls for tougher regulation after false information quickly spread about the identity of the knife attack suspect who allegedly killed 3 young girls. Speaking about social media, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said,
"This is not a law-free zone.
I do agree that we're going to have to look more broadly at social media after this disorder, but the focus at the moment has to be on dealing with the disorder and making sure that our communities are safe and secure.
A top prosecutor said reposting, repeating or amplifying a message which is false, threatening or stirs up racial or religious hatred could result in the police paying people a visit. Britain's media watchdog Ofcom has urged social media companies to deal with content stirring up hatred or provoking violence on Britain's streets. And Mayor of London Sadiq Khan said they should do a better job of stopping misinformation.
They should think about their algorithms. They should do a better job taking down disinformation, not just X, by the way, but other social media platforms as well that we know are being used to propagate hatred.
Protests and riots broke out across Britain after 3 young girls were killed and several more injured in a knife attack. The protests were sparked in part by fake information the suspect was a radical Muslim asylum seeker, and in part due to deep-rooted discontent over British immigration policy. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida canceled plans to visit Central Asia today. He's staying at home instead because of a higher than usual risk of a major earthquake.
As Prime Minister, I have decided as a precaution to remain in Japan for the period of at least a week that the Japan Meteorological Agency has designated for a reassessment of earthquake preparedness and take all possible measures as a government to respond to the situation and provide information.
The Japan Meteorological Agency yesterday issued an unprecedented warning of a huge earthquake on the country's Pacific coast. The advisory follows a magnitude 7.1 quake that struck the southwestern island of Kyushu the same day. Officials did not indicate when it would definitely happen, but encouraged people to be ready to evacuate if necessary. And a professor from the University of Cambridge explains why Japan is at risk of seismic activity and how prepared the country is for such natural disasters.
A magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck off Japan's southern coast on Thursday. Japan is one of the world's most earthquake-prone countries. A volcanologist says that's because it's part of the Philippine Sea plate, which is moving towards Eurasia about 6 centimeters per year.
That 6 centimeters per year, it doesn't move smoothly. So it will stick. And all of that strain is being built up, and then it will snap, and that's an earthquake.
Oppenheimer has made many trips to Japan studying the Ring of Fire. That's a 40,000-kilometer tectonic plate of volcanic and seismic activity that surrounds most of the Pacific Ocean. The Ring of Fire is also where a lot of the largest earthquakes happen.
That's not a coincidence. They're both collocated because this ring defines the margin of the Pacific Ocean plate.
Earthquakes can be a terrifying occurrence, but being prepared is key. For many Japanese, seismic activity is a very real threat that they must live with, but their preparedness and response is always second to none.
I think people are very aware of the risk generally. There's a lot of information, a lot of monitoring, very sort of high-tech monitoring with multiple agencies involved and linking to civil protection.
Japanese seismologists held an emergency meeting on Thursday. They've warned there's a 70 to 80% chance of a magnitude 8 or 9 quake within the next 30 years.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today in the Olympics, so let's start right there as the U.S. women won gold in the 4x100 meter relay, but not so much for the men's team. What happened to them?
Yeah, disqualified. They had what's called an illegal pass during the exchange of the baton between the first and second legs of this race. Basically, the two runners, that's Christian Coleman and teammate Kenneth Bednarik, kind of crashed into each other during the exchange, and so Coleman momentarily passed Bednarik, and that was it. Even if they weren't disqualified, they finished 7th, mainly because of that botched handoff slowed them down just for a second, and that's all it takes in this race to set you back. I mean, it's 4 speedsters on every team sprinting all out. 1 second makes all the difference. Now, meanwhile, for the women's team, an incredible performance by Team USA, especially Sha'Carri Richardson, who flew down the home stretch to win. Now, she was in 3rd place when she got the baton from Gabby Thomas, but she just exploded past everyone for gold. That was an incredible run by her.
Now, this morning, 16-year-old U.S. sprinter Quincy made history as the youngest American male to participate in track and field at the Olympics. How did he do?
Well, he was part of the U.S. men's 4x400 relay team that got third place in their heat this morning, which was good enough to advance to tomorrow's finals, but it took quite a comeback for Team USA to do so. Now, unfortunately for Wilson, he didn't have the greatest run. He ran the first leg in 47 seconds. It's about 2.5 seconds slower than what his best is. I'm sure nerves probably played a part in that. In any case, he was 7th out of 8 when he handed the baton to Vernon Norwood, who ran the second leg. Now, only the top 3 teams advanced, so it took a major comeback for the U.S. to do so. The U.S. did move into third position until the final 50 meters of the final lap when Chris Bailey, he really exploded down the home stretch, really saved the day for the U.S. team. So they advanced to the finals. That'll be tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Shifting gears now to the NFL. Preseason games are underway this week. What are some players to watch in these exhibitions?
Well, most NFL stars sit out most of the preseason. I mean, the risk for injury is just too great. They might play a few series in one game, and then that's it. These games are really for rookies and free agents trying to make the team. With that said, I think everyone's interested to see Atlanta rookie quarterback Michael Penix Jr. Now, if you remember, Atlanta signed Kirk Cousins to a $180 million contract in the offseason to be their quarterback, then shocked everyone by taking Michael Penix in the first round of the draft. I mean, if he's good, it's worth it. Quarterback is the most important position of the game. But usually when you draft someone in the first round, you're expecting them to play that year. And I'm sure Kirk Cousins is expecting to play this year as well, too. Now, elsewhere tomorrow, Washington Commanders play the New York Jets. Again, I'm curious to see what the Commanders have in rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels. He was a fantastic player out of LSU last year. Can run and throw. Meanwhile, for the Jets, I don't think they are going to play Aaron Rodgers. They'd like to keep the 40-year-old healthy for this upcoming season, though.
Well, circling back to this weekend's Olympic schedule, what are some major events to watch out for, and where are we in the medal count?
Well, tomorrow, the U.S. men's basketball plays France in France for the gold. And like Serbia yesterday, France has some very good NBA players on their roster, like reigning Rookie of the Year Victor Wembanyama and Defensive Player of the Year Rudy Gobert. So the U.S. is definitely going to have to bring their A game tomorrow. And that's going to be at 3:30 Eastern time. Also, the women's soccer plays Brazil for gold. Now, for a bit of history, the U.S. last won gold in this event in 2012. At the time, it was their 4th in 5 years. But then they didn't medal in 2016, settled for bronze 3 years ago in Tokyo. So they're hoping to get back, obviously, the gold medal position. That'll be at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Then on Sunday, not as many total events, but the U.S. volleyball team will face Italy there for the gold as well. Now, as far as medal count, the U.S. is way ahead with 111 overall. China second with 83, and France has 57. But for the all-important golds, U.S. and China are tied at 33. I think Australia is third with 18. So it's really U.S. and China for the gold here. We'll see how it plays out this weekend.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
2 days ahead of the Olympic closing ceremony, the last remaining athletes and American visitors are preparing to say goodbye to Paris. Many say they had a great time in the French capital, which raises the bar high for how Los Angeles will organize the Games in 2028. NTD's international correspondent David Vives has the story.
With the Games winding down, athletes were seen gradually leaving the Olympic Village. Many described their experience as amazing and incredible, even as the event nears its end. U.S. rowing athlete Michelle Zegzer said she appreciates staying a bit in the capital, taking time after her contest to visit the city and get used to having a baguette for breakfast.
The food's been delicious. I've tried a few things that are new to me. They have a really nice espresso cart and a boulangerie with the best baguettes I've ever had in my life. So I really enjoy the fresh baguettes in the morning. Really nice to not just have the Olympics, but also get to see the history of the city and the culture of the French and the countrymen, to see their food, see their architecture. It's so beautiful.
Next to Team USA headquarters, U.S. tourists said the Paris Games has left them with surprises and amazement.
I think our best experience was walking through Paris, and we walked over toward the Eiffel Tower and went in the Parc du Champion, I think that's how you say it, and it was the outdoor venue next to the Eiffel Tower.
The way the opening ceremony was staged, it wasn't the typical stadium, and where the Olympic cauldron is lit, it's in a beautiful garden. So I think that's a very different Olympics in a good way,
In an interview for L'Equipe, Los Angeles 2028 organizer Kaze Wasserman said Paris has set the bar high for the Olympics, notably with contests taking place at the foot of landmarks monuments. As for athletes and supporters, they also have their take on that matter. For Eric, this could even be better in the US.
I would think because it's Los Angeles, maybe it's become more Hollywood. I would predict so. Very action-oriented Hollywood, yes.
I don't know. I doubt it, but it's just a different venue. I think what they've done here kind of sets the stage, and we'll see what the future holds.
I hope that the USA will also do a fantastic job following the footsteps of France. We don't have the public transit. Like, for example, I've been taking the metro today, and it's so easy to navigate. They have it well marked, and it makes it easy to see all the different monuments and the different stadiums.
The Paris 2024 Summer Olympics will officially close on Sunday, August 11th. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.